Hello, and welcome to the AOPA Air Safety Institute's safety webinar, What You Don't Know About the NAS But Should, Secrets from an FAA Flight Check Pilot. My name is John Collins, and I am the Manager of Aviation Safety Programs for the AOPA Air Safety Institute and your host for this webinar. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Please make sure you've muted your microphones, and if you have any technical issues, we will not be able to troubleshoot them during the webinar. However, audio issues can usually be solved by logging out and logging back in. We will take questions throughout the presentation and answer as many as we can before the end of the webinar. Use the question mark on your PC or laptop control panel located on the right side of your screen, or the question mark at the top of the screen on your tablet or smartphone to submit them. As you can see, our webcams are available right now, and they will be on throughout the webinar and during the question and answer session at the end. For those of you on computers, we should appear to the left of your screens. If you're on a tablet, we'll probably be on top of the presentation. And if you're watching this on a smartphone, you may need to swipe left or right to view the webcams. Wings credit is available for this webinar, and if you signed up for it with your FAA Wings account email, you will receive credit automatically to your Wings account within 7 days. Also, a recording of this webinar will be available via the Air Safety Institute webpage at www.airsafetyinstitute.org, and you'll receive an email with a direct link to that as well. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, you can find them at webinars.aopa.org. Before I introduce our presenter, let's take a quick poll of our audience. What level of pilot certificate do you currently hold? We're going to let this run here for a few more seconds. Getting a good response. We'll share the results here shortly. Excellent. All right. Just a few more seconds. I'll share the. I'll close the poll and share the results here. Here we go. Welcome our lone sport pilot, or maybe there's a couple of you out there, hopefully, but mostly private pilots and commercial or ATPs, student pilots, some flight instructors in the mix. Very good. Excellent. I have one more poll for you, and we're going to launch this one. It's a follow-up to that earlier poll. Do you have an instrument rating? Okay. So far, it's looking about like half of you don't, and that's fine. About a third of you do have one and are current and proficient. Excellent. And there's about 25% that have it but aren't current or proficient. We'll keep taking in some more votes here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. We'll share those results. So there you go. Excellent. Well, our presenter this evening is James Herrington, and he is an airspace system inspection pilot for the FAA and is a captain in the United States Air Force Reserve, where he does almost exactly the same job in performing combat flight inspection and airspace inspection. He also holds an ATP certificate. He's a CFII and an MEI, and he's done a lot in aviation. He's been a regional airline pilot, C-130 pilot rather, for 10 years. Currently flies a Challenger in the Air Force, and then he's flown Part 135 cargo. He's been a jump pilot, and he owns a 1946 Navion. So James, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. You have the controls.
Thank you, John. First, I'd just like to say thank you to you, John, and ASI and AOPA for inviting me here for this. It's a humbling and exciting opportunity to come out and talk. I know that in the past several years, with flight check or flight inspection, you'll hear us on the radio as flight check. We haven't been able to come out to Sun and Fun or Oshkosh and meet the public as often as we'd like. And certainly with COVID going on this year, it's nice to have this opportunity to reach out and have some interaction with the flying public and remind you guys that we're still here and that we're the FAA and we're here to help. That said, all right, what do you need to know about the NAS? There's a lot of it, right? The National Airspace System, it's huge, it's everywhere. When you look at ICAO, the rules change a little bit. For those of you who are going international or go international now, the things that we inspect still remain the same, just slightly, things slightly change with ICAO. Today I want to focus on mostly just the NAS and what we're doing here in the States. So if I can share my screen here, which I think you should all be able to see the slideshow. I'll just move on to the next one. What is the flight inspection services mission? Well, there's not really a specific way to say that. However, the mantra that we like to use is our job is to keep the NAS safe. Our job is to make sure that everything that you use, you see, all the navigational systems out there and procedures and the IFR SUP or Green Book AFD is accurate and safe, has good safe information for you to use. So if you have problems, if you find problems with that, please report that stuff to us. There's obviously a lot of information out there, and only about 140 of us, maybe 100 active, to go through the information, and we can get that updated or changed or checked. So we're here to make sure that what you have in your home base is safe to use. We're doing that in several different platforms. I fly the King Air on the bottom left and the Challenger on the top right. The middle is Lear 60. We keep these airplanes based at about 5 different bases throughout the United States. The Lears are mostly out in Sacramento, so we have a base there. We have our home base in Oklahoma City, and then where we fly all of the aircraft. There's a base in Battle Creek, Michigan that handles most of the north, upper Midwest and north. We have a base of operations in Atlantic City, which handles most of the Northeast, and you can imagine they stay relatively busy with all the airports and up there in the busy airspace. And then my office in Atlanta, where we handle most of the Southeast and the Caribbean. With the Air Force, we also go international and fly the Challenger International to do inspection for other countries. You can imagine many countries may not have the resources to have a flight inspection service, but still want to have aviation services, especially American Airlines or American-based airlines flying into their countries. So oftentimes they'll pay us to come do flight inspection for them. Additionally, with the Air Force, we have bases all around the world, and of course we need to make sure the procedures and navigational aids there are safe. So we use the Challenger for that mission. The just GWiz, the flight deck we fly with the King Air is the ProLine 21. If you guys fly glass, this is similar to everything you'd see normally. Ours is configured very slightly different from this, but it's pretty close. The big difference for us is that we fly with a custom database in our FMS that runs in the background that basically shows us all the approaches and all the maneuvers that you guys that are coming down the road, so that we can go check them out before you have a chance to see them in live action. In the back of the airplane, we carry a technician. If you flew in the Air Force or know anybody in the Air Force, we think of these guys very similar to a navigator, just a different mission, different set of skills, but they kind of run the nuts and bolts, the beeps and squeaks. They're watching the oscilloscope, they're counting microamps and microvolts, and as we fly through the sky and grab them with their antennas, they're hanging all over the airplane. They have a screen here in front of them and another one that pulls back out, and periodically you'll see recordings like this. This is a healthy dual transmitter capture effect localizer at, I forget where I took the snapshot, but this is the kind of stuff that we see, and every one of these lines has a different meaning, and this is what all together, when it's healthy, looks just like this simple CDI on your HSI or whatever instrument you're using to stay on course for the localizer or a VOR or the case may be. So we're looking at all this stuff to try and make sure that you see a good healthy signal. One of the reasons we wanted to reach out, and I'm happy to be here to talk to the public and answer questions, is that we want to make sure that we have an opportunity here to ask you guys to help us with the flight inspection, and then also let you know what we're doing for you while we're out there. So there is information in the AIM available to you about flight inspection and what we do. You can find it at 4.3 or -3-24, and unfortunately, it's really not much if you look it up. It's 2 paragraphs. But what it does say is that we're doing things that we're not just flying approaches, right? We're out here doing maneuvers through airspace at relatively low altitudes, 1,500 feet and below sometimes even lower. And it may not make sense to you when you're out there flying, when you see this King Air or this Challenger doing, flying at 3 feet low or 3 feet off the approach light system, really low on an instrument approach, or flying, sideways across the final at 2 miles, away from the airport. So it just says that we do maneuvers that may not look normal to you out there. We might fly opposite direction. Because we're flight inspecting a runway 14 when the winds are favoring runway 32, and then it goes on to say that due to this, the air traffic controllers are giving us special handling, and they do. They're really good about helping us out to get the inspections done. Because if we delay 15-20 minutes to get an inspection done, that delay per inspection adds up to hours in one day, and then that pushes back the next day, and it pushes back the next day, and next thing you know, we've wasted a bunch of taxpayer money just burning jet fuel, waiting for our turn to do an inspection. So that's why you'll see us periodically roll into an airport, and there might be 4 or 5 airplanes in the pattern for runway 32, just say, and we're asking for them to delay or extend their final so that we can run opposite direction down runway 14 for a quick pass. We're just out there trying to verify that obstacles or haven't popped up, new ones, since the procedure was developed, and that the procedure itself is still safe. So we just ask that you be patient with us, and we'll be patient with you as well. If you hear flight check on the radio, you'll usually hear something like flight check 73, blue and white FAA King Air, 10-mile final, low approach recorded run, runway 14. And what we're just saying is that we're actually out there recording a signal coming down runway 14 from a long ways out. It's not going to be a normal pattern, and if we break off for safety, we absolutely will. We're not going to try and force everybody out of our way or anything like that. We will be good stewards of the airspace. But if we break that off, we might have to turn back around and go back and fly 10 miles back the other direction to fly 10 miles back down runway 14. And we just ask for a little cooperation and patience to helping us out getting the inspection done. Because the sooner we're in, the sooner we're out, and the sooner we can turn everything right back around over to you guys out there flying the airplanes. As I said, we don't really fly practice approaches. We inspect approaches, which is a little different from when you're out there learning how to fly or doing flight inspection or flight instruction, and teaching the VOR followed by the ILS followed by the NDB all to the same runway. So what we ask is that if you do hear a flight check at an airport, especially an uncontrolled airport, help us out and try to avoid doing practice approaches at least until our inspection's done. And we can certainly tell you right there on the radio about how long we think we're going to be. There's several airports around. I know that throws a wrench into things, but it really helps us work with you to keep those approaches up so they'll be available the next time you want to go fly them. Because approaches have periodicity. So every year and a half, for example, we have to inspect just about every approach in the country. You can imagine there are 1,500 ILSs just by themselves, and those take an hour and a half, 2 hours to inspect. So when you look at the GPS, for example, if we can't come in and inspect it because the traffic is too dense, then that approach may go dead and have to be noted off the air, and then it's unusable until we can come back in and check it. So we just ask that everyone work with us on that, and we'll work with you. Feel free to ask us questions while we're out there on the radio if you hear flight check. What we inspect, well, it's really almost everything. You can see the list here. I'm not going to roll down the list, but you can see it's a full gambit. Everything, military. If you probably don't fly any ASR or PAR approaches if you're not military, but we certify those and inspect those as well. I saw that about half the people in our group here don't have instrument tickets or instrument ratings yet. Well, that doesn't mean that we're not out there doing stuff that helps you out. You see, we do PAPIs, we do VASIs, we do lots of things. Communications, we check that. At the bottom, you'll see radio frequency interference. That's good for both VFR and IFR pilots. If someone hears, say, a radio station on a tower frequency or on an approach frequency, or even on 122.8 or one of the commons, you report that, and we encourage you to report that. We can take directional antennas and install them on the bottom of the airplane and go out and actually pinpoint the actual broadcasting location for whatever's interfering with that frequency, and send authorities over to make sure that the frequencies for aviation, they're designated for aviation, are clean and safe for use. So, and that can be awful fun. And again, that kind of lends to, as I said before, you might see us flying super low altitudes and odd maneuvers trying to pin down that kind of thing. We're authorized. We actually have an exemption from altitudes. We're authorized if we're working to fly as low as we need to, down to, as long as we don't hit anything, levels, and that's literally true. So we also, after accident investigation, if there was someone were to have a mishap while flying an approach, we'll roll in right behind them as soon as we possibly can and inspect the facility and make sure that it wasn't our fault or something that we could have done differently. And it's not always the facility itself that could be the issue. Snow, for example, can wreak havoc on a localizer or a glide slope. So somebody crashes or has a mishap in a heavily snow environment, we can come in and check and say, yeah, actually the snow was affecting that, and there should have been a snow totem there. Or if there is a snow totem out there, we can go back and verify that. All of these things have their own specific type or ways to inspect them, and they all take various times. So that's what you'll see us out there doing. You see at the top, Standard Instrument Approach Procedure, SIOP, that's what we call them. You think of an approach plate. The approach plate, the final product, the actual SIOP is a 40 or 50 page document that goes nuts and bolts on the actual approach, and that's what I deal with. And then I'll look at the final approach plate, if you will, and verify that all the information is correct. If you see a problem with any of that stuff, again, please feel free to report that, and we can look into finding out where the problem is and fixing it or checking it. Sometimes information changes and it just doesn't flow very well all the way through the wickets, and we can facilitate that. This right here, this was an inspection that I did on Orlando International about a month ago, and I know it's a busy slide and it's blown up here. The point is that all of this flying right here was about 1,000 to 1,500 feet in Orlando. And you know how busy Florida is. If anybody with aviation, it's super busy. So you can imagine that we were very busy in this particular environment, and that's not to say that we were only dealing with airline traffic flying into Orlando International. We're also dealing with, you see Kissimmee right there. We're down low and right up in their airspace. I'm not going to sit here and go through all the different maneuvers here, but you can see that there are arcs and holding patterns, and there's a bunch of flying around that goes into inspecting. This is just one ILS. It took us about 4 hours to get this one done because they had to make some adjustments. What do we look at when we're looking at an ILS? Well, we take the ILS and we put it through various stages of degradation, and we mimic environmental problems, basically, and we make sure that the facility still operates in a safe way with those antennas or cables or whatever artificially degraded to a point where to a predetermined point. And then we have monitors on the system to say that if the signal ever gets worse than that, then it just kicks the whole ILS off the air. It stops broadcasting altogether. That's what you hear when you say, or that's what you think of when you see it say monitor off, or unmonitored means no human being that's going to be notified when the system monitors itself off. So we take it to the very edge of what we allow it to do, widen the signal out, and make sure it's still safe to fly. And that's kind of what it looks like. We also do ships. Gee whiz, it's fun for us. But ships have tack ends on them, and we go out there and fly those things and certify them. It's a good bit of fun. So this brings me to one of the more informational. That's all kind of big picture what we do. Now I'm on to a topic that I think would be useful to you guys, especially with GPS and being such a big up and coming and piece of the future of the National Airspace System. So at the top, you see I've got glide slope versus glide path versus visual descent angle, VDA. This is something that I really didn't know when I came to flight inspection. I'm not embarrassed to say that. There's a lot of symbology on instrument approach plates. I know that this is not Jeppesen. Jeppesen basically takes the procedure that we do and they print it in their own format. We don't flight check, we don't inspect Jeppesen charts. We inspect DoD charts. So that's what we have here. I'm sorry if you're used to Jeppesen. You can pull one up, and you can pull up these very approaches and compare the symbology. It's very similar. This right here is an ILS, and you'll see I've highlighted where it says GS 3.0 threshold crossing height 46. GS standing for glide slope, right? It's an electronic signal being emitted out into space from the antenna, which is really a reflection. And they've depicted this feather here. What this is telling us is that this is a glide slope. It's precision. It's been flight inspected, that it's safe to fly all the way down to a DA, and it has also been checked, terped for obstacles. So if you stay on center line all the way down, no matter what the barometric pressure is outside, you're safe as far as obstacles go, and the signal's going to be good to go. So that's a stipple, and then a glide slope. Next slide, we've got glide path. Now this is a LPV. A lot of people think of it as a precision GPS approach. It's coming, a lot of training programs are allowed to treat them as precision approaches these days. So in here, it's depicted a little bit differently. And you'll see you have GP for glide path 3.0, threshold crossing height 46, and a stipple. So with an LPV, what's happening in your box is it's taking your GPS solution, it's taking SBAS, Space-Based Augmentation Systems. In the United States, that's WAS. In Europe, it'd be EGNOS, and the Indians, I believe, have a program as well as the Japanese and the Russians. Here, it's WAS. And your GPS is computing a WAS solution that includes altitude. And it's precise enough to bring you all the way down to, in this case, 200 foot above the ground. It does not matter what the barometric pressure is outside, what the temperature is outside. Your GPS is deriving lateral guidance and vertical guidance. LPV stands for, if you don't know, it stands for Localizer Performance with Vertical Guidance, LPV. And so that means that the GPS trap is a triangle, it's a funnel. So when you're at 1 dot right of course at the final approach fix, you're further off center line than you are when you're at DH, for example, or DA, sorry. Same thing's true for the glide slope. It's deriving a precision glide slope from your GPS location, and you're being funneled into the runway. So that's glide path. Now, here's the reason for the topic, because that's probably all stuff that everyone knows already, and I'm boring you. Here's the fun one. VDA. You notice it's depicted differently, 3.1, and we have a little angle here with a threshold crossing height. It doesn't say GP or GS, and VDA being a visual descent angle. Now, this is an LNAV in VA, or an LNAV approach. You're probably going to find when you program,
I'm sorry, can I break it? Comment from some of the viewers, a lot of acronyms and a lot of non-instrument rated pilots with us on the webinar. So if you can explain some of those a little bit, that'd be helpful. And just kind of,
sure.
I know you know this stuff inside and out, and that's great. But if you could explain a little bit of it as we're going along, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. So going backwards just a little bit, we talked about glide slopes. So that's your instrument landing system, electronic glide slope for doing a precision approach down to the runway. You've got your glide path, which is your vertical guidance to get from your final approach fix on final down to the lowest altitude you can descend to using a GPS signal. And it's using GPS to derive, which is your global positioning system, to derive your glide path, which is like a glide slope. It's your vertical guidance down to the runway. So you'll get a little snowflake, if you will, on your avionics that tells you when to descend and how fast to descend. And if you're above or below your glide path in that case. With the lateral navigation in the LNAV GPS approaches, these approaches are think your old VOR type approaches, or NDB approaches, for example, which are just directional beacons, like an AM radio station with a homing beacon. These approaches bring you left and right and keep you on center line for your runway, and they give you a point when you can start descending. This particular approach, coded in your avionics, will give you a pseudo glide slope. It'll give you a recommended descent rate and it'll show that on your screen if you're flying a Garmin 1000 or a Garmin 500 or any one of another versions of the glass cockpits that are out there in most small airplanes these days. This particular approach will give you what looks like just like the glide path. Well, the glide path I just talked about was terped. In other words, it's been checked for obstacles. There's someone's gone out and surveyed it and verified that there are no obstacles in the way. The visual descent angles like this one are not. No one's gone out and surveyed that the 34-to-1 obstacle identification plane doesn't have any trees sticking up to it that are going to be in the way of your aircraft. So what we do is for flight inspections, we go out and we see these, and we actually check them below that recommended glide slope that's coded in your GPS to see if they're safe or not. And if they aren't, you'll see something like this. You'll see in the note in the profile view here, visual segment obstacles. This particular approach is going to give you your GPS. If you're flying this on your GPS, which you would be because it's an LNAV approach, is going to give you a recommended glide slope to follow. And it's probably 3 degrees, and it's just mathematically deciding, calculating out 318 feet per nautical mile, and here's where you should be. Well, on this particular one, if you stay on glide slope all the way to the runway, and you never change it, even beyond MDA, which is your minimum descent altitude, which is where your visual segment of the approach starts. If you follow the computer all the way down, then you're going to hit something. Someone like me has flown this approach and seen an obstacle on final that's beyond the point where you switch from instruments to the visual segment in this particular approach. I don't think many people know that or understood that, the difference there. In other words, don't fly these approaches. Everyone always says don't fly below minimums, but don't poke your head down below MDA and just think that, well, because the GPS gives me a glide slope there, that I'm safe to fly it. You may find that you're not. Additionally, this particular one's been checked, and we saw something. It says visual segment obstacles. Well, if we check one and we don't see anything, we don't add any notes at all. If we have not checked one yet, there won't be a note there. So there's no way for you to know if this is an approach that someone's one of us has come through and actually flight inspected yet. Does that make sense there? Are there any questions on that specific topic? It's a good way to keep yourself safe, to know that there may be obstacles on the visual segment of an approach that has a visual descent angle depicted a VDA. Additionally, having your altimeter set properly is super important with these as well, because changing your altimeter setting will change where the GPS thinks you are in space, and it'll move that glide slope up and down. Which is why sometimes you'll see approaches, different reason, but you'll see approaches that have snowflakes for cold weather ops that you have to correct for, because you may be flying lower than what your altimeter says in real world, corrected for true altitude, lower than what your altimeter says. And we can just come back to, if anybody wants to dive in with questions, they're coming so fast I really can't read them straight off, but we can also come back.
I can send you some here, James. There's some good questions coming in. One more dealing with the some acronyms. Maurice wants to know, what does terped mean? You've used that term a couple of times.
Okay, yeah, I have. I have. I'm sorry. Terped. Terped is when it means someone in the terps office, and forgive me on the actual acronym for terps, but those are the people that go back and they take surveys and they look at obstacles like towers and trees and things like that, and they make sure that those trees and towers aren't in any of the protected airspace. If you hear someone use the term protected airspace on approach, the terps procedures people out in Oklahoma City are the ones that look at all the surveys and they say, okay, here's the airspace we need to protect from obstacles on an approach, or in a departure or arrival or whatever. And they then go look at surveys and verify that nothing is going to pop up and stick up into that protected airspace. That's what terped is. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Let's take some more questions that have come in here as we've been talking.
All right.
Is there some place that you can that a pilot can check to determine when you last verified the approaches at their airport? Is that
No, I mean I can, but it's not open to the public for looking. Um, what you can see on the approach plate is the date of the last amendment or issuance of the approach. Um, that's the date that it was published. So in the bottom left of an instrument approach plate, you'll see it right here, actually on the one I have on the screen. You'll have Amendment 3B. A brand new approach would say org for original. And you'll have amendments, and then you'll have an alphanumeric number behind that amendment. That just tells you how many times it's been changed. And that's not really important other than to say that you should check to make sure that the one you're flying is the most current one. And that can be done by going to, there's several websites out there. Airnav.com has some stuff like that. I believe that our website, FAA.gov, you have to dig for it a little bit, also has the ability to check that you have the most recent approach. These days, everyone seems to have electronic flight bags. And so you just hit update and it updates everything. But when I was learning to fly, you had a big book of paper charts. And just because the book was out of date didn't mean the chart you were flying was out of date. So what we did was we went down here to the bottom and looked at this amendment number and made sure it was the most current one. And the date next to it is, again, the date that was published. But no, unfortunately, the actual last time it was checked is not something that's left out to the public. And frankly, I didn't know that anyone would want to know that. But
well,
but
there's another
you can always call and ask. It's not hidden.
Yeah, there's a related question to that. Do you guys post airports that you'll be flying to prior to the day you're actually flying to it? And is there somewhere online to see that scheduling? I think somewhere online to see the scheduling answer is no, but do you guys let airports know you're coming to them? Could the manager send something out to the base pilots?
So that's a partial yes and a partial no. It's a great question because it comes up all the time. I talk about asking for patience and people working with us on getting the inspections done. To be sure, the larger airports, they know we're coming. I don't fly to Miami without Miami knowing we're coming. We don't do Atlanta Hartsfield without them knowing that we're coming. The problem with trying, because it's a great idea, it's a great question. The logistical problem we run into is that inspections, we never know what we're going to find. If all the inspections always came out to be normal and good, then we would know exactly what our schedule is going to be. If the weather was always exactly what we wanted it to be, we would know what our schedule is going to be. But our schedule, unfortunately, becomes very fluid. And for that reason, it's difficult to issue NOTAMs, for example, like flight check NOTAMs. I'd love to have a flight check NOTAM out there for XYZ airport that says, hey, we're going to be here. Call us with any questions. Between these times, please avoid practice approaches. If we did that, we would end up issuing NOTAMs and never showing up. And then we're the boy who cried wolf. So that said, the yes part of your answer is that many times, if we're checking equipment like a PAPI or a VASI, actual equipment ground checkpoint for a VOR, the airport manager will know we're coming. Oftentimes they do, and it's up to them if they would like to pass that information out. We can certainly recommend we talk to them. Hey, let your local pilots know that we're going to be in the area over sometime in the next day or two to check this. I'll take that feedback back, and that might be some way that we can meet in the middle on that. But as far as a schedule published, unfortunately, we can't do that.
Okay. We still have a lot of questions coming in, but let's move through some more slides here, and then we'll open this up. Great questions, folks. Keep them coming. Really appreciate that.
All right. So the next one's more for our VFR pilots as well as the IFR pilots. There's a little. So maybe I should have started with it because it throws you a bone to both. But we're going to go on to PAPIs and VASIs. I took an approach chart here and highlighted where it says VGSI, visual glide slope indicator, and RNAV glide path are not coincident. So this happens a lot. I mean, it's really common. You'll see approaches that have vertical guidance. So you got a glide slope that's telling you which way to when to descend and how to descend to the runway. And then you look out there at the PAPI, and the PAPI shows 3 red and 1 white, or 3 white and 1 red. And this note is designed to tell instrument pilots to expect that, right? Well, why would that happen? Well, it could happen for several reasons. PAPIs specifically come in several different height groups. You got height group 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the best way to think about that is that if you're flying a Cessna, you're really close to your landing gear as far as physical distance from the wheels. And whereas if you're flying a 747, you're a pretty good ways from the touchdown point, well above it. And so the visual glide slope indicators, the PAPIs and the VASIs, they're designed to be used visually from the cockpit looking out the window. But the glide slope antenna or the bottom of the aircraft may not be in the same location as far as where the signal it's following, or the glide or the GPS antenna, for example. And so we set up those height groups based on what type of aircraft are expected to be at that airport. The airport the PAPI just did this afternoon in Kentucky, we're a height group 2, set up for Cessnas and Barons and things like that. Height group 3 is also super common. Height group 4 would be for 747. So if you go fly your Cessna into Charlotte, you're going to see this note that says the glide path indicators are not coincident with the ILS. And that's because they're set up for height group 4. It's supposed to be done that way. Another question that comes up with this is okay, I'm an instrument pilot and I'm flying down an instrument approach, and I get to decision height and I look out and I see the PAPI, and the PAPI says it shows 3 white and 1 red. Now I'm on a visual segment, so I'm flying a visual approach. From there, do I stay on the glide path that I'm on, or do I drop down and get on the PAPI and go 2/2? Well, that's a multifaceted question, something to think about for yourself. You could very well be there doing that. Or if you're flying a VFR at night and there are trees out there, and you just follow the PAPI as it sits, or do you want to fly it during the day? Do you calculate in your mind what a 318 feet per nautical mile, roughly it's 100 foot per nautical mile of descent for a 3-degree glide slope? Do you check that when you're on a mile final, that you're about 300 feet? You might want to think about doing that with respect to the PAPI, and here's why. PAPIs are good when we leave them. There's 4 boxes there. None of them are set towards 3 degrees for a 3-degree wide glide slope for the PAPI. They're all 4 set differently to give you an average angle. So the middle of those boxes is 3 degrees. Well, they get bumped by lawnmowers, super common, or people will go out there and tweak them. And there's really no way for us to know that. PAPIs and VASIs are only commissioned by us one time. Once they're commissioned, unless someone complains about them or asks us to come back and look at them, or there's some equipment change that drives us to come out there, we won't come back and look at them again. So whereas the approaches are checked every 1.5 years. So food for thought on whether or not you might want to drop down and get on the PAPI, or just stay on the glide path that you have there when you're on the visual segment. Worth thinking about. Clearance below path I have here, that's our terminology for when we do inspect PAPIs, we drop down to the point where all 4 lights are red, and the last one is just on the edge of turning to white. So we're all 4 red, and we fly it all the way to the runway, 10 degrees right, 10 degrees left of center line, and we verify that you're not going to hit anything. If there is something there, then we'll either have the airport manager have it removed, or change the angle of the PAPIs up to 4 degrees instead of 3 degrees, whatever the case may be. There's several options there. But we do come through and check them below the path that you're going to fly as a general user. The same thing's true for the instrument approaches as well, but even the visual glide slope indicators are used that way. VASIs are obviously set up a little differently, but we check them in a very similar manner when it comes to what we're looking for. So that's why I include that there. And all the other different visual glide slope indicators as well, but these are the 2 most common by far. And I think that's all I really had. I was hoping to prompt some questions from that.
Yeah, James,
I'm ready to open it up if you are.
Actually. So let's go ahead. We'll turn your cam back on, so we can we can see you.
Yeah.
I'll turn mine on here. All right, let's go through, and we got a bunch that have come in. A lot of folks with asking questions about various acronyms. So the PAPI, Precision
I
Approach
apologize for that.
Indicator, VASI, Visual Approach Slope Indicator. And let's see. So I'm going to go back up here a little bit. Some earlier questions again. And another question about scheduling your approaches or your inspections rather. Does it make sense to fly inspections during off-peak hours?
So that's a great question. We get that all the time. Well, when are off-peak hours? If you're talking about at night, well, most of what we do is check for obstructions.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be difficult to check for obstructions at night.
Yeah.
Off-peak hours, we already don't fly on the weekends very often because the weekends are the peak hours for general aviation. Do we try our best to avoid congested times? Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to scheduling inspection, while that's a priority, it's racked and stacked with all the other priorities. So would it make sense to? Well, again, depending on what you're talking about inspecting. Yes, and certainly in some instances. We have OPSNet airports, the big ones, Atlanta Hartsfield, Charlotte, O'Hare, all the big airports. We inspect those at night for everything except obstruction clearances. And then we come back during the day and we beg and we plead and make bargains with them to get permission to do a low approach in the middle of the day at Hartsfield. They don't like us for it, and they understand it. And we all work together on it. We're all FAA, but that's the best we can really do.
Okay. Mahesh has a question. He's a bit confused. States you're not supposed to descend below the MDA in any case without the runway environment in sight. So why does it matter whether there's an obstacle beyond the MDA or not?
Well, good question. The simplest answer is that there's a common, I think, and I've seen in my experience anyway, there's a common conception that if you have guidance that's in your avionics that you dial up, and that guidance is flight checked for obstruction clearance and good. And since that glide path, or I'm sorry, that VDA in this case, the visual descent angle on the non-precision GPS approaches, since that doesn't go away on your screen, there's a conception out there that it's flight checked and it's approved by the FAA and checked to be per safety. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to make sure that everyone knows the difference between the ones that are and the ones that aren't based off symbology on the approach plate and just understanding what your box is telling you. What you do with that, I agree, you should never descend below MDA without the runway environment in sight. That's certainly true. However, if you do have it in sight and the visibility is not 10 in a million, it's at the very edge of what's legal, and it's nighttime, well, there may be obstructions there that you can't see, or difficult to see. Let's put it that way. Add some rain, add some other difficulties. My goal is just to make sure that you know what the guidance is telling you and how to tell the difference, so that you can make those decisions for yourself.
Okay. All right. So Mike asks, how can an LNAV, VNAV, or lateral navigation or a vertical navigation approach have lower minimums than an LPV approach?
Great question. Short answer is the trapezoids used by the TERPS individuals are different. They're shaped differently. And because of that different shape,
approach designers are going to use different.
Correct. The approach designers have templates. We call them trapezoids. That's the area of airspace I was talking about earlier. The designers use to identify areas of airspace that can't have obstructions in them, or certainly obstructions can't go above a certain altitude. Well, the shape of those protected airspaces is different on an LPV and on an LNAV VNAV. Because of that, it's possible, and it's rare, but it happens, to have a minimum that's lower on a LNAV VNAV than an LPV. And the short answer, without getting really into the weeds and pulling up TERPS orders that will put you to sleep, is or put us all to sleep, frankly myself included, is that the shape of the protected airspace is different because the the LPV approach, the Localizer Performance Vertical Navigation approach, has a funneling in final. If I'm one dot right of course, the final approach fix on that approach, and I'm half a dot there and half a dot at the DH, then I'm closer at the DH than I am with the final approach fix. Whereas if I'm half a dot right of course on the LNAV VNAV at final approach fix, I'm the same exact distance right of center line as I am if I'm a half a dot right of course at the missed approach point. That's the shortest, easiest answer I have for you.
All right, thank you. Majed has a question. We have a local airport that might have a dead radio spot. How can I tell if the issue is in my radio or the tower? And by the way, he's noticed recently that some other pilots have problems in the vicinity of the airport,
How can you tell? Well, without going out and trying to inspect that yourself, or just go out there with a handheld radio and check your airplane, handheld radio or something like that, which I wouldn't recommend. That's our job. I would recommend talking to the airport manager, the tower itself, and making sure they're aware of it, and asking if there's any other, file a NASA report. Those things do come to us. I actually get those daily for things that affect us. And if we get enough of them, or if it's a serious enough issue, we'll definitely go, you'll go get on a itinerary and we'll do a surveillance. Because we are always surveilling the National Airspace System when we're flying along, always.
Okay. And if somebody runs into a problem with an instrument approach or a frequency or things like that, how can they let you guys know? I mean, you talked about talking to the airport manager, but is there another collection point somewhere that they can use?
There are a couple, yes, a few. I just mentioned the NASA reports that we hear about as a private pilot, that everyone thinks it's a get out of jail free card type thing, which it isn't. I'm just being tongue in cheek on that. But those reports really do make it to us. The people there at NASA take those reports, compile them, and so that's one way to do it, to file it. And I would recommend that all the time, frankly. If you see something that you think is unsafe with an approach, certainly if it's a safety issue, file a NASA report. Those things do funnel to us. Another way you can do it is at FAA.gov. There's a safety hotline. You can call, you can email. Those things, no joke, really do make it to us. The other way you can do it is I don't have a slide. I apologize for phone numbers to directly contact us. But flight operation or flight inspection services can be reached through their phone numbers and emails to reach us directly through FAA.gov, and you can find it there. That maybe I should have included some sort of a contact. I really wasn't anticipating. Hey, I've got a problem. How do I fix this? But we're there. There's several avenues, and they all work. If nothing else, call John. John will find me.
There you go. Happy to help. Alex wants to know if there's any attempt to incorporate safety for single-engine aircraft in the design of approaches, specifically not having vectoring or holding areas over open water out of gliding range.
Oh, it's a great question.
It might be a little out of your wheelhouse, and that might be more in the approach design guys sector, but you guys have to check those. So,
yeah, I mean, the direct answer to the question is yes, but not for the reason that's mentioned. When I fly an approach to inspect it, I'm looking at it from the perspective of a single-engine pilot with a minimally equipped aircraft. Now, I know that a lot of the presentation here has been acknowledging that most people have glass of some sort or GPS of some sort in the airplane, but when I fly an approach, I'm considering how hard this would be to fly for the user, and especially the expected user at a certain airport. So if it's an uncontrolled airport in rural Georgia, for example, where I grew up, I'm expecting it's going to be a single-engine airplane. That said, I don't know that the approach designers consider the gliding range of a single-engine aircraft when they're building the approach. I certainly that would not be a criteria that I would use to shoot an approach down, because I'm going to assume that your aircraft is mechanically sound and safe, and in an emergency you're going to do whatever's necessary to deal with that emergency as a PIC. It's certainly worth considering when you accept an approach, though, whether or not you want to fly that approach based off of how far it goes over water.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Good question.
Yeah. See. Oh, here's a good one. Why so many night NA notes on approach charts? What criteria is not being met?
That's a great question. Instrument approach procedures, instrument service for an airport requires a night evaluation, all right? Because we have to go and verify that effectively cultural lighting doesn't look confusing for the approach of the airport. So you're not going to fly to the airport at night and see lights on the street that are the right color. And Gulfport's a great example. There's an intersection right off the end of the runway with an approach light system going through it, where you're driving around the roundabout with these yellow lights, and they look just like the approach lights there. And so we had to go and alter that. Well, some airports get the instrument approach looked at before the night evaluation is done, or periodically. We're all, the FAA is not infallible. It's identified that an airport that has had approaches for a long time doesn't have a documented night evaluation that's ever been done. And when that happens, when we identify that, we issue notes to say this approach is not available at night, specifically because we haven't been able to verify that it's safe to fly at night. And so we'll come back in, do a night evaluation, and remove that NOTAM. You saw a rash of those. I'm sure it's probably where the question came from, because it was a hot topic, and still is. I'm hoping moving forward you'll see fewer of those. Mm-hmm. The other issue has to do with using PAPIs to mitigate as a mitigating factor on the visual segment. As I said earlier, you're not supposed to go below MDA unless you have the runway approach or runway environment site. But we can all think of times when it's legal due to visibility, but difficult to see obstacles that might be out there. Well, we can use, approach designers can use visual glide slope indicators like VASIs and PAPIs as mitigating factors for that at night. And so if the PAPIs are out of service or not commissioned, haven't been checked, then sometimes you'll also see that. That's a long answer, but hopefully you'll see fewer of those NOTAMs in the future.
Okay. Now, Johans wants to know, you said you're saying believe the PAPI and the VASI at your own risk. So who's responsible for its precision and safety margins for obstacle clearance?
Well, the direct answer at commissioning is us. That's my job. I go through and commission, make sure it's good to go. Once I leave, it belongs to the airport. It always belongs to the airport, but the responsibility shifts to the airport, which is why I emphasize that if to the general flying public, if you see something that doesn't look right to you, doesn't look safe to you, the trees are too close to the PAPI, report it, absolutely. And actually, if there are a certain number of reports given, the PAPIs will get NOTAMed out of service until one of us can come through and check it. And the trees grow. It does happen. So who's responsible? Well, for checking it, us. But once we leave, trees grow, lawnmowers hit the box. It happens, and bump them and change the angles a little bit. So it's up to the airport manager at that point, whoever that is, ultimately to verify that they're in good working order. They usually have two bulbs in them. One of the bulbs might be out. It's the airport manager's responsibility, and then ours as pilots, as aviators, to bring forward information that doesn't look right.
Okay. Casey wants to know, what are the weather and daylight requirements for inspection flight checks? And do you also check departure obstacles? And how often is that verified? And again, how often do approaches have to be checked?
So every approach, that's several questions there. All good questions. One of the nice things about my job is I really fly in bad weather. You can imagine if I can't do, if I have to be VMC or visual meteorological conditions to check for obstacles, then generally speaking, we don't fly in the weather. We fly in good weather. What are our minimums? It's VFR for most approaches, most inspections. But if I'm above the minimum vectoring altitude, so if I'm in airspace that I can verify is safe and away from obstacles, I can inspect, and I'm not looking for obstacles, obviously. I can inspect in the clouds. VOR approach, or VORs, for example, are things that we can do some of our inspections. Actually, IMC, instrument meteorological conditions, no joke, in the clouds. It all kind of depends on what the inspection is. When it comes to intervals, how often inspected, well, each type of facility, i.e. an NDB or a VOR or an IOS, each type of facility has a slightly different periodicity attached to it. So generally speaking, every year and a half. But that's a give or take, and it changes a little bit. Did I get all three parts? I may have missed a section, a part of that question there.
Yes, I think you did get all of those. All right. Here's a good question. Do you augment standard instrument approach checks with commercially available synthetic vision to validate or verify the accuracy of synthetic vision?
No.
No. Okay. Might have been your easiest question yet.
Yeah. No, we don't. Those databases, we don't flight inspect them. That is for your information. We do not verify the validity of them. We do look at the obstacles that are charted on the approach plate. So if there's an obstacle, but we don't use synthetic vision to validate that or to enhance. In fact, synthetic vision, if you fly with it like 4 flights in synthetic vision, for example, in the low-level environment, doing what we're doing, it's almost a distraction, frankly. We would need more people on board to try and look at that kind of stuff.
Okay. This is a little off topic, but Jim would like to know, do you have any advice on getting a sectional chart corrected? He has 2 radio towers that are long gone, but they still show there. And he said he tried years ago with no success.
Yeah, interesting question. So I have a method within my job for correcting and altering sectionals and en route charts and whatnot. I would say send it to me. However, if I say that, I'm going to get how many hundred people signed up for this, sending me all of their problems with charts, and I'm going to be inundated. So I'll give you the party answer, which is send that to the 3 channels I mentioned before for identifying problems. There's a charting office. I will also say that it's the reason you may have had less than success before is that it's more difficult to get an obstacle removed from a chart than to get one added to it for, what are probably obvious reasons to not obvious to me until it's explained to me, but it's more difficult to get them removed because it takes a survey to do that. It takes more than just you or even me. Well, I could do it, but because of my job, but it takes more than just a report from a pilot to say, hey, this obstacle's not there anymore. Imagine the liability if we took one down because there was a NASA report saying that it wasn't there. Now, if removing the obstacle is going to increase the airport's capacity for use, and so there's a good reason to get rid of it, then the airport managers can facilitate that, and that can happen. If I see there's not one there when I fly an approach, and this happens all the time, I do remove it. But that's the easiest answer I've got for you.
Okay. And Mike's chimed in here and said there is contact information on the sectional chart on how to report problems, so you can use that as well.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah. So
a lot of people don't see sectionals anymore. I'll mention that. A lot of people don't have paper sectionals anymore. They have FlightAware or 4Flight or Flight Plan Go, whatever.
Or Garmin or whatever they've got.
Where they've all been. Yeah, so you have to go actually look at the legend in their document section because you don't have the border anymore. But yeah.
Kay asked this question: in Southern California, why are some missed approach points holding patterns a few miles off the coast, and many of them are not in gliding range for most small aircraft?
That's a great question for the approach to designers. I would be guessing, so I can give you my speculation, and I'll have to qualify it that way. Holding patterns have huge protected airspaces attached to them. There's some misconception on it. There's 9 different templates they use depending on what type of airplanes you're going to be flying or expected, but the holding airspace is relatively large. Also, the misapproach holding points required. One of the requirements for that point is for you to be able to receive the ATIS or the weather at the airport that you're flying that it services. It's one of the 3 places you have to be able to hear the weather. So communications could also drive that. Now, in Southern California, I know that's probably not an issue because you could probably communicate everywhere. My guess for Southern California would be that it has to do with the size of the holding pattern and putting it into a convenient spot where if you went missed, you could go there and not encroach on all the other airports around it. But that's honestly a guess, and it's kind of out of my wheelhouse for design approaches.
Okay. Well, here's one that might be in your wheelhouse, and I think we'll use this as our final question tonight. Mahesh asks about the approaches for runway 23 at KMBL, Mike Bravo Lima. And
Stand by
so,
a second, let me pull that up.
Yep, go to the resource. So he's asking a question about the note, and it says that 1-19 NA at night. So runway 1 and 19 is not available at night or not applicable. It doesn't say circling approach not authorized.
I'm sorry, what was the identifier again? KM?
Mike Bravo Lima.
Mike Bravo Lima.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that Manistee?
I believe so, yeah.
So I don't see a runway 1. Oh, there's 119. Okay, I gotcha. All right, what was the question? I'm sorry. Thank you.
So the question is for the approach plates for runway 23, they say 119 is NA at night. What does that mean? Is it an absolute prohibition on using 119 at night for VFR pilots as well as IFR pilots, or just for instrument approaches? And it doesn't say that a circling approach is not authorized.
Right. Well, that probably goes back to, and without digging into that actual procedure, that probably goes back to what I was talking about before with the night observation. But let me just 1 second to look at that. Airport remarks. We're looking to see if it's listed in the AFD as not available at night. Because, again, without digging all the way into that, yes. Frankly, in ForeFlight, I don't even see an approach for 119.
No, this is the approach of runway 23. It's the note
so,
on the
yeah,
approach for 23.
Well, right, I see an approach for runway 28, runway 10. I don't see an approach for runway 23 at Manistee. Mike Bravo Lima. Okay. I don't see a runway 23. Yeah. Runway 28 there. Read that one, see if there's a note there. Honestly, I don't have a good answer for that one. My guess, straight off the bat, without having the data right in front of me, it's taking a lot of research that would have something to do with the night evaluation. I mean, that runway is 2,700 feet long. If there's nothing in the AFD about not using it VFR at night, especially if it's lit, then, and there are murals in that runway, so no, well, okay, it's on the note for the runway 23 approach. That's attached to that particular procedure. It has to do with the procedural use, not absolute, not use it at night.
Okay.
That's the shortest answer I can give you. It'd be attached to that procedure, using the procedure to get to that runway.
Okay. One last question. I know I said the last one was the last question. We'll go with this one. In doing departure procedure, do you check departure procedures, and if so, how often do you do those? And are those part of?
Yeah, that was a part of the question I missed earlier. I apologize for that. Yes, we do check departure procedures up to and including up to and through obstacle verifications. So, and when there's a procedure, there's several different techniques for it. I won't go into trying to teach flight inspection. How often do we teach them or check them? We check them every time they change. So approaches, for example, approach procedures have a periodicity that triggers an inspection, and we set it up so that we get to see approaches every season, basically, because the water table changes things, the snow changes things. So we set it up so we can see that. Departure procedures, we only check them when they change. So, and they do periodically change, do the surveys and whatnot. As an obstacle is identified for an approach, then the procedures designers will go and see if that affects any other approaches or departures, and then we'll get a new departure procedure package. I just did one yesterday, and two actually in the past 2 days. And what we do is we go fly and we pretend that we're we fly at what it says you have to do. If it says 600 feet per nautical mile, we fly at 600 feet per nautical mile at 130 knots. And if there's an obstacle out there that we can see, so we know which one's the actual controlling obstacle, and we usually have that identified in our package, we turn straight at it. And we literally fly straight at it at the minimum climb gradient required for the approach, and we verify that you're going to miss it. And if we don't think we're going to miss it, we shoot it down. But
Okay.
we get close. We get close periodically, but we're looking for is to make sure that the designed rock or required obstacle clearance altitude. So if you have to clear an obstacle by 148 feet, we fly over the top of it at that minimum performance and verify that minimum performance gives you 140 feet, 48 feet, if that's the actual rock. The rock changes depending on what you're doing. Good obstacle clearance.
All right. Well, thank you. James, thank you very much. It's been a fun webinar, a lot of interesting information. I know probably pretty heavy on some of the instrument stuff, and some of the VFR folks may have been a little bit lost here, but you know, these guys are out there working for your safety and trying to make sure that all of us are flying in a safe environment as possible. So James, on behalf of ASI and AOPA and all of our members and the pilots around the country, thank you for doing what you do. We really appreciate that. And for all of you for joining us this evening on the webinar, thank you for doing that. We appreciate that. Our next webinar will be December 17th at 7 o'clock Eastern, when we'll look back at 2020, the year in aviation safety, with my boss, Richard McSpadden, Vice President of the AOPA Air Safety Institute. You'll receive an email from us within the next couple of days with a link to the recording of this webinar and a link to register for that December 17th webinar. So on behalf of James, myself, all of us here at AOPA, thank you and fly safe.
Thanks.